armed with, particularly over the last 20 years. Our previous president, Mary McAleese, was very much to the fore in visiting some of the battlefields in Flanders and in France where Irish men died and presiding over the erection of monuments. We've also cleaned up our own national grave monument at Island Bridge, which is a very beautiful monument designed by Lutyens. If you've had time to go and see that, it's really worth seeing. Very beautiful, very melancholy place. So that has a huge effect on the country because, of course, there's the young men, many of whom would have been unemployed and joined the army because they needed a job, are heading off to slaughter. In 1916, we have our seminal foundation moment, which is the 1916 Rising. A small group of individuals occupied the General Post Office, which you can just about see up near the pillar there on the left on Connaught Street, and declare an Irish Republic. Now, there was meant to be a rising all over the country, but it was called off at the last minute by one of the leaders. These people decided to go ahead in any case, and with certain knowledge that they would be shot because it was treason during wartime to rebel against the government. The rising lasted for a week. Casualties amounted to about 350 people, quite a few of them civilians, as happens in any of these situations. Then they surrendered. A number of the leaders were shot. And public opinion, which had been very much against the rising at the start, turned back in their favour. I spent some time in Princeton just a couple of weeks ago where they have remarkably the letters of General Maxwell, who was the British officer commanding the forces in Dublin at the time. And one of the things he has is a book of a scrapbook of letters sent by the plain people of Ireland to him after the execution, threatening all kinds of shocking things on it, the horrible stuff he's done to our gallant patriots. None of them, of course, signed. It would have been nice if they signed the names so we could not get credit for the people who were trying to no. So it shifts. You can see the shift. There's also the threat of conscription late in World War I, which had not happened in Ireland because it was too sensitive, and that also moves people's opinions into a different direction towards the up-and-coming burgeoning Sinn Féin party, the militant nationalist party, who want not home rule but an independent Irish republic. The 1918 election, Sinn Féin sweep the boards, they wipe out the Irish Parliamentary Party, largely due to the backlash against the 1916 executions and the conscription crisis, and they then declare an Irish Republic. The British, of course, don't wish them to have that, and the War of Independence begins and continues on to 1921. When we get a truce, but the truce is based on us remaining within the Commonwealth, on better terms than home rule was provided, but also the partition of the country into Northern and Southern Ireland, which is as it remains today. Not partition, but the oath of allegiance to the king caused a civil war. Partition was not really on the agenda in terms of what caused the civil war. So we have quite a short-lived but very vicious and violent civil war, in which about 3,000 people die, and that still remains with us today. And you yourselves come from a country that had a very divisive civil war a very long time ago, and know that these effects can last for a very long time in communities. So that's a quick run through. We then our independence in 1922. I'd love to say, and we all lived happily ever after, or something like that. It never is. So we've been independent since 1922. The whole business of partition has constantly been there. We have the outbreak of the Troubles in Northern Ireland at the end of the 1960s, when Catholics in the North started to fight for their civil rights, echoing what was happening all over the world, particularly in the United States at the time. That's refuted by the majority population, who have openly said that what we want is a Protestant state for the Protestant people. Things get violent, the IRA comes back into being again, and we have 30 years of mayhem, murder, and terrible anguish for the people, which will take a very long time to get over. Thankfully, that came to an end with the Good Friday Agreement, ably abetted by one of your presidents, Bill Clinton, who really did put a huge amount of energy into putting pressure on the key players in that at that time. It's funny when you have the right mix of people together at the right time how things can work historically for the best. And he was certainly the best person. Whatever else one may think of him, and I do admire him, he certainly had flaws. But in terms of his input into the Irish peace process, I think we were extremely lucky that he was there at the time. Okay, I'm going to sit down just for a tick, and we're going to look very quickly at this site. Let's just check. This is top tour of early Irish, 20th century Irish history. Now, suppose you were interested in researching your ancestors. You know, I've got glasses 10 years ago, I certainly have to see the glass. What is it? Okay, you go onto our search page. Your ancestor's name was Mary Murphy, very common name. Okay? Up to this point in time, before this stuff goes online, if you knew where Mary Murphy lived in 1911, you could find her because you could come into the National Archives, look up the place she lived in, and there she would be. Adrian assured me the reliance on technology causes all kinds of trouble. I don't think if you kick it, it works. So I'll keep talking about Adrian's sketch today. The big difference with the census online is that you can now search by name. Up to this point, you couldn't. So if your ancestor's name is Mary Murphy, you know where she lived. You'll see in a minute there were 764 Mary Murphys in Dublin in 1911. Where to start? How would you know what to do? Right? There'd be no way of knowing. And it's usually rural people, and this, I'm not sure if it's the same in the United States where you're all very mobile, and it is a very mobile society. But in Ireland, in rural areas, people tend to stay in the same place for periods of time, for generations, so that you'll find generations there over maybe 200 years where the name goes back, and you can track it very easily. But it's not like that in cities, where people move around cities all the time, depending on whether rents are high or low, depending on where they might have to work. All sorts of things come into play when you're in the city. Also, you couldn't find people like lodgers or soldiers or students or servants or people who are in institutions at any point, like workhouses or hospitals or mental hospitals or whatever. So this was a great step forward when we were finally able to organise the name of the person. Please come back. Come on.
She's going to get it.
She's going to get it. What we're going to be looking at, is a quick look at the kind of Dublin we had in 1911, with a focus on particularly women. And there were all kinds of interesting women in Dublin at the time. We had the suffrage movement, for example, in full swing. Ireland got votes for women in 1918. I didn't know until not that long ago that women in France didn't get the vote in 1944.
Wasn't it in 1971?
Right, tell us. Where? Quick brief. Well, 1980 is pretty good, you know, considering when you look at other things. I think in America it's a kind of federal decision, was it? The different states gave the vote at different times, or was it a national? 1920. Yeah. And they all came at the same time.
Yeah, federal.
Right, it's federal.
Depending on how you.
So we even beat America. Mind you, the British suffrage movement as well, there were tremendous people like Pankhurst who were fighting very strong battles for this. In Ireland, the suffrage movement is divided up into two. You have on one hand the constitutional suffrage movement, run by people like Anna Haslam and other Quakers. Quaker women were always wonderful at managing. It's just died, Adrian, for no good reason. I know you hate me now. Why you think after we make it? I just decided to go dead in the middle of everything.
Oh,
prayer. I know. So you have on the one hand, broadly speaking, Quaker women like Anna Haslam, who spend decades lobbying the House of Commons, inviting people like Millicent Fawcett to come over to Dublin to speak to the masses. Brilliant, you're a genius.
Yeah, it should be okay.
Should be okay. What was it? Do we know the next one?
I'd say it's actually the battery for the laptop, so it should remain plugged in.
Excellent.